And welcome to Mr. Constitution classes. Today is the final, just general Q&A. We're going to start the Constitution again next Tuesday. So today is the last time. You just going to be um, just kind of talking. So Doug usually gets here about 3 o'clock. It's about 2:50 right now. And so if you want to jump ahead to when Doug gets here, jump ahead about 10 minutes into the video. For the time being, we're just going to sit here and chit chat on the comments. So, how's everybody doing? There's no shortage of things to talk about today. That is for sure. Um, I think we'll probably get into some of the stuff with Carrie Lake, maybe. But again, I don't know. I haven't talked to Doug or Brady, so I know that they're planning on getting here. But yes, I am trying to stay warm too, Pat. I don't know where you are, but it's in Southern California. It's a little bit chilly. Hey, Darren, how you doing? I got your thing. I forwarded it to Doug, but I don't know how. Uh, uh, I don't know if he saw it or not. What's the temperature, Pat, in Florida? I want to bounce something off you guys. You guys are you're the early birds that come in, and I haven't said anything to the guys, but I just kind of want some feedback. I'd like to not necessarily switch up how we do the class, but make it a little bit more visual as opposed to um, when I say visual, I mean like have things on the screen where they're talking about where we are to stay on track. Um, I don't know if you guys have any feedback on things that would help you as we go through the Constitution. I would love to have some ideas tossed around. So, well, Darren, and I did try. Just know that he's not. uh, I love Doug. I love Doug like a brother. He's fantastic, extremely knowledgeable. But when the stuff with 1871, um, uh, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the stuff with 1871, myself included. I think there's especially when you talk about the corporation, because the language of corporation and how we use today is different from how it was a long time ago, especially that back in back in the 1800s. We I think what we do with the etymology of language is we use older words as we use them today, as opposed to using them how they meant at the time that things were created. So we overlay our understanding on a word, though back then it meant something different. And I think that's where the corporation gets I think there's a misunderstanding of how the term corporation was used. But again, that's me just throwing out my opinion. So how that's all implemented, I work very closely with a guy named Mark, and oh, look who's here! Doug is here early. What's going on there, Mr. Gibbs?
Yes, sir.
I was talking. I forwarded something to you. I don't know if you've seen it yet. It was something that had to do with 1871. Um, but anyway, long story short, as I said, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on on etymology of language, specifically in the term corporation and how it was used back then compared to how it's used now. Because I think a lot of people, what we do is we use our understanding of a word now. Uh, we overlay that on how a word was used back then and what it applied back then, and
Exactly.
and what happens is that then we get a different interpretation of what is meaning by that when it doesn't when we could read it that way today and it would mean exactly what we think it means, but that's not what they meant when they wrote it because their understanding of the word is different compared to what our understanding of the word is today.
Which is my point on most of the stuff I talk about.
Right. So not and again, I'm not saying that there isn't legitimacy to the whole thing of the 1871 and how government and stuff. I'm not saying that there isn't some possible legitimacy there. I'm just saying I think there's misunderstanding all around based on the etymology of language. You're not saying anything.
I'm not. There's no argument here.
Okay.
Uh, Now, I know what was trying to be done and what was intended also. So it's not just the language, but the language is a big part of it because the language is what's used to alert people to get them riled up, and they're getting riled up over a word that didn't mean what they're claiming it meant. So
When you mean
when I
word,
say when I
when you
say
mean
they,
word, you mean corporation.
well, or any word, but that would be one of them. I mean, there's a number of words where that has happened. I mean, regulate's another one. You've heard me go over regulate in classes and all
Right.
that quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot of words where what was meant and what is, and it's like Darren said, well, corporate law is corporate law. Well, corporate law really didn't though become what it is until the 20th century. In the manner that it is, was there law regarding businesses and mercantilistic activities? Absolutely. Let's not go the other extreme. One of my frustration is extremes. If you
Hmm.
don't believe this, then that must mean you believe this. And usually I'm somewhere in between, usually anyway. But it's like when we talk about, corporations, and I said, well, corporations didn't exist in the manner then that they do today. That doesn't mean there wasn't a corporate problem. There were large companies that had a lot of power that colluded with government.
Hmm.
The founding fathers discussed that, but they called it
Right.
instead of crony capitalism or corporatism today, they called it mercantilism.
Hmm.
That there was such thing as a redistribution of wealth. Samuel Adams called it the schemes of leveling. So in many ways, those things existed, different language, and they existed maybe in a slightly different way because now we have things like technology and a legal system that, I mean, corporations didn't have for example, limited liability protections
Hmm.
that they have today back then, unless they actually went out of their way to go through a legal system that would not legal system, a legal procedure that would make them a trust. And then once corporations got the limited liability, protection basically because of the way the laws were set up in the early 20th century, it being a trust was not as big of a deal.
Now, Darren just said that his town is incorporated. Does what does that mean? Does that means it's a business? Is
No, it means it's an entity that can take care of its own business. It has its own council or whatever. A corporation, in the most general sense of the world, is a body that acts as a single person. That is a collection of a bunch of stuff or people or things that has a means of taking care of itself as if it is a person. That's what
I-
corporation basically means
I'm
in
gonna
the most rudimentary
do just for giggles. Let me do this here. I mean,
Yeah, so I'm here and Brady isn't. That's weird.
well, he sent a text saying that he's having some technical issues on his end and that
Yeah.
he will be here shortly.
Yeah. Well, see, I didn't have a class before this, so the only thing I had to deal with was dogs and my wife, which that was easy to fight off, But
There it is. That's odd. Okay, so I'm going to do this. This is the American Dictionary of the English Language, Webster's Dictionary, 1828.
Mhm.
So I'm going to do
Apparently they didn't type the same back then too. No, I'm kidding.
Corporation, noun, a body politic or corporate formed and authorized by law to act as a single person, a society having the capacity of transacting business as an individual. Corporations are aggregate or sole. Corporations aggregate consists of two or more persons united in a society which is preserved by a succession of members, either forever or till the corporation is dissolved by the power that formed it by the death of its members by surrender as a franchise. I don't see,
Yeah, keep
such
going.
corporations are the mayor and aldermen of cities, the head of a fellow of a college, the dean of chapter of the cathedral of the church, stockholders or a bank insurance company, etc. A corporation's sole consists of one person and his successor as a king or a bishop. So I don't really understand how that would apply.
Right. Well, and getting back to what I was saying earlier, from their point of view back then, corporation basically was a a group that has come together. They're acting as a single individual, as a single entity, like a city. And it mentions mayor there and the aldermen of cities.
Mhm.
So you have a city council. The city now can take care of its own business. It doesn't need a county or a state to do things for it. It is now able. It's now its own thing, so it can act as an individual on its own with its own voting powers. That is a city that's been incorporated, or a municipal corporation, which is which is the language that's used in the Organic Act of 1871, municipal corporation. We can look it up. So
Well,
Hey guys,
the original Constitution did not go beyond the 13th. And it was dissolved in 2019 when it filed. Who the Constitution was dissolved? Or the
yeah. What was the dissolution? What was dissolved in 2019, Darren? Do you have a link that you can share?
I think the story is that the corporation was dissolved.
By, I think there are some. I've heard.
Oh yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, well, Trump dissolved the corporation,
Trump dissolved
so
the
he
corporation.
saved us from. Yeah, well, yeah. Like I explained earlier, limited liability kind corporations. Basically, if you wanted that before the 20th century, you had to go through a special legal process to form a trust. You didn't have all these protections as a corporation. I mean, and once again, it's not to say that corporations, big business entities colluding with government did not exist or wasn't a problem. It's not go the opposite extreme. Once again, the founding fathers were fighting mercantilism, which, was basically the big corporations that we call corporations today. They weren't called corporations then. They were just big companies, big businesses. They didn't have the same kind of legal protections and so on and so forth, colluding with the British government against us, mercantilism. So, just because I'm saying that we're not a corporation and the word corporation meant something different doesn't mean that all the other things suddenly stop existing too. There were problems. There are issues we've had, and we're fighting the same crap today that they were fighting then. And it's like I tell people, well, Doug, I don't know if they knew about, like redistribution of wealth. Oh, yeah, they did. Samuel Adams called it the schemes of leveling, for example. Well, they didn't know about socialism. Yes, they did. They called it communitarianism, communalism, or utopianism. It's the same stuff, just different actors, different technology, different logos.
Like the Pilgrims almost died because of socialism.
Oh yeah, Jamestown too. Matter of fact, yep. Jamestown lost like I've always fumbled over the numbers. It was somewhere between 500 to 700 first settlers out of that whole group of settlers that came over time, 60 survived because of socialism. 60.
So I walked into my favorite conversation. How you guys doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I was just telling him it was weird that I was here before you, but see, I didn't have a class. I didn't have all of that ahead of time. I just had to deal with the dogs and the wife, and that was easy to get away from.
Yeah, I was having trouble with the Wi-Fi system. Got it done just in time.
Okay, so this is, I'm going to share this. This is the Corporation of the United States. I'm guessing, Darren, that this is what you're talking about. United States of America Corporation is dissolved. The 1871 United States of America Corporation is dissolved. Trump and others signed a new American Declaration of Independence July 4th, 2020. U.S. military knows the true 2020 election results. So I'm guessing this is what you're talking about. Yes.
That's pretty much the general story. When I encounter it online, that's pretty close to it.
Yeah.
So the part that gets me the most is number 3 with the U.S. military, and I always ask the question: is you talking about the same military that disobeyed Trump's orders when he was trying to withdraw from Afghanistan? That military that basically did everything they could, gave him false information, about stuff going on in Syria. That military, I have a tough time with that part of it.
Well, the thing is, too, is we know what we're dealing with when it comes to the left, and when the left does something.
Actually, Doug, I'm going to say that I'm going to respectfully say that you're wrong there. I don't think.
Well, wait, wait.
People truly understand what we're dealing with.
Well, but hang on just a second. By definition, who's the left?
Okay. Well, okay.
I would say. Okay. What do you think my definition of the left is?
I think your definition of the left is people in Congress, people in government.
My definition of the left is everyone who is the left of the Constitution, which means anybody and everybody that believes that the government should be bigger than what the Constitution calls for, which is probably about 90% of the Republican Party, probably all the Democrats, and probably a majority of the people in this country because they don't know shit. Now, of course, when I say the left in the context I did a moment ago, I mean the power players in that game. And once again, that doesn't necessarily mean just the Democrat Party. I mean, we have an establishment. I've been calling the Republican establishment the establishment way back before Jasmius abandoned me because I dared to support Trump. And he'd get mad at me. Well, there's no establishment. He used to argue with me about that crap. I'm like, yeah, they're basically the left of the Republican Party who feed from the same damn trough that the Democrats do. When it comes to the machine, they're the same thing.
Let me say that a different way. Anybody who's paying attention to the Twitter files, you've got a perfect example of multinational corporations and the government working hand in hand to suppress the rights of their citizens. Ergo, a textbook definition of fascism, which others would call, some people out there who don't know diddly squat would call that the fascism far right, but it's not. Because who's in power right now? The Democratic Party. So if they're the left and they're fascist,
well, I would say the establishment left is the establishment left, which incorporates a portion of the Republican Party, is in power.
Yeah, the left is anybody and everybody to the left of the Constitution. Constitution's dead center, so it really isn't a right unless you want to think about anarchy. But then what does anarchy do?
Well, I'm sure
people scream for order, and that winds up becoming an oligarchy on the left anyway.
Doug,
really you have the left and you have the Constitution.
I'm sure you've seen the John Birch Society's. It's like the 5.
Yeah. Matter of fact, they explain it the same way I had been explaining it for years. When I finally came across that,
let me see if I can find that
because I wasn't sure who stole it from who.
Let me see if I can find that because that's actually really.
No, I showed it to. Matter of fact, I showed that video to my.
I know,
my
but I'm just
high schoolers.
I'm saying for us here because it's
not
very long.
It's a pretty good depiction of what the political spectrum is supposed to look like, and not because and I know Brady wants to go into the up-down thing, but let's stick with this for a second. The original left-right really comes from the French version of a political spectrum where everybody in the assembly sat on the right if they supported the king and the established church, and everybody who sat on the left supported a secular government and moving away from the monarchy and the state church. And the moderates sat in the middle. So therefore, they being whoever's out there that thinks that they got any semblance of power, have then defined right and left in this country as meaning that. And really, if you look at it, as it says in that video, when you find it, we never had a state church. We never had a monarchy or a nobility in this country. So that's a false left-right political spectrum when it comes to the American version of it. The American version of it is 100% government to the left, 0% government to the right. Constitution is dead center. It's a, or as it says in the video, constitutional moderates. And so then you have to ask yourself, okay, if the Constitution is dead center, 100% is to the left, 0% government is to the right, where does all of these right-wingers actually sit on the political spectrum? 99.9% of them sit to the left of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So I could simplify that. First of all, it is an exercise in futility to try to explain geopolitics and one-dimensional right versus left. That being said, right and left is a distraction.
I told you the up-down thing was coming. All right, go ahead.
No, it's not. It actually isn't.
I'm excited. This might be something new. Go ahead.
No, it's not, because I've been saying it. Ron's heard me say it 1,000 times. Right versus left is just a distraction to keep us from looking up and to see who's really pulling the puppet strings. They pit us against each other with fake ideologies.
Right.
It's not about right versus left, red versus blue. It's about liberty versus tyranny. Right now, the tyrants are in charge because we're too busy arguing about, stupid thing, not stupid, but all the little issues of the day. They just try to pit us evenly against each other, and they don't care which one's in power.
And that's why, for me, it's not about right versus left. It's constitutional or not constitutional. Are we following those original principles, or are we not?
And the Constitution is a living and breathing document. You can change it anytime you want. If you go through the process.
Not right there.
Hold on. Let me see here.
It's a heck of an interruption.
Yeah, I didn't want it to play, but I wanted to.
I didn't know if it was a salute or.
But
military guys, we hear a trumpet, man. That's either a salute or you're going to parade arrest or something.
Something like that, yes. Yeah, and if you dare not stop at colors, be it in the morning or in the evening, sun up or sun down, you guys are like.
Yeah, well, you'll need to go get a new ass because the one you have just got chewed off.
Right.
Hey, let's. I do want to hit on some of the Kari Lake news with that trial. So, if we don't spend the entire show on right left, I got some fun stuff to share.
While he's still fiddling trying to find that.
Well, I found that.
Did you find it?
Well, I found it. I want to. You guys go do your thing. I'm gonna or talk about it because I'm gonna find the specific, because it's a 30-minute video, but I want to find the specific thing where it talks about the political spectrums.
All right, let me then do a real quick prologue on Kari Lake.
Okay.
And then I'll let Brady run with it. So Kari Lake recognized there were issues regarding, there were irregularities, anomalies regarding the election. So she decided, though, to put in a lawsuit, not hammering on the irregularities per se, but the procedures that probably led to those irregularities. And there is evidence, hard evidence, that procedures were not followed. The judge decided, basically, that there's nothing there to see. Move along, folks. And that's that.
How much was he paid?
Yeah, and so to me, that's evidence how far our courts are up the rear of who we're fighting, because it's not like, well, it could be seen one way, or the evidence is hard evidence. Procedures weren't followed.
Right.
Period. It's been admitted. All right, go ahead, John.
Okay, so I did find it. Let me go ahead and hit this over here, and I don't really know how.
that indeed there was such a bastion of freedom and opportunity.
Let's see.
You're not at the beginning there.
Yeah, this is.
There you go. It begins
Yet
with
most Americans today
Franklin.
have been persuaded that our nation's governmental
go back to
system
the
is a
beginning of
democracy
Franklin.
and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates.
You to move that further
So let's
to the right.
analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or
So
dictatorship.
I'm not gonna play that whole thing. I'll
No,
share
that's-
the link
that's
with
a-
you guys. But this
Yeah,
is
that's good.
yeah.
That was a good cutoff. That's a perfect cutoff. And that did. That's a good graphic. I like that.
And I'll share the link with you guys. So if you
Yeah,
guys want to watch it.
ultimately, what he goes on to say is that there aren't any monarchies or dictatorships or
Right.
theocracies because it even if it's one person, he has his people around him. It's still a powerful few over the many. So really, all of them are oligarchies.
It's either
democracy and democracy is a transitional system that always winds up as an oligarchy. So really, you have either oligarchy or republic.
Right.
It's-
And anarchy is basically no form of government because it generally
But it's transitional like democracy.
it's a
and it winds up
transitional because
becoming
it creates a
oligarchies,
power
yeah.
vacuum that ultimately is filled by a sole
Well, and the
individual.
very people that create anarchy, they don't want anarchy. The whole reason for the anarchy is to create an oligarchy.
1,000%.
Well, it's like, it's one of the other things I've said a few hundred times is all of the isms don't really matter. Those are just
Mhm.
means to an end. It's just liberty versus tyranny.
Yeah, it
That's
just
all-
comes
that's all.
down to it. Yeah, exactly.
I don't care what kind of ism, because right now, you can make a very strong argument that the bad element in the United States is got a very strong communist root to it, and you can make that
Mhm.
argument. Mark Levin does that in American Marxism, and he's correct. But I can make an equally good case that the people running the country and have been for quite some time are fascists. It's a form of fascism, which supposedly is the opposite of communism if you think in those terms. So you got to take the blinders off and understand that. Dumb it down. Liberty versus tyranny.
Right.
So back to Kerry Lake.
Oh, and guys, just FYI, the Mr. Constitution YouTube channel has a strike because of something that we discussed back in mid-November. So it was labeled as misinformation, and the video was taken down. So the channel has a strike.
Was it during Constitution class or Q&A stuff?
I think it was. Well, I think we finished the Constitution like in right towards the end. I believe it was the one where we were talking about 25, 26, and 27 or something like that. So it was right. It was towards the end, but I don't think it was anything that we.
Well,
were
if we get
talking-
any more strikes, we may have to consider moving this to Rumble or something like that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The problem with that, obviously, and we know this, is using StreamYard right now only works with YouTube, but there is promises by StreamYard that they will have.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
they're not set up with Rumble yet, I don't think, right?
no, but it's very easy. I mean, people come to mr-constitution.com, so we could very easily get another channel.
My point is, though, to have it streaming live on a video platform right now, YouTube is the only one that StreamYard is working with. But from what I understand, they're working to get that going on with Rumble as well.
They are.
What are other people using to get live on Rumble? Because I watch plenty of live Rumble streams.
They use Rumble.
Okay,
I mean, there are other things. Let me rephrase it. I don't believe that it would be in our best interest to go away from YouTube. I think that we should just keep it on YouTube.
Yeah, but if we get any more strikes, you get 3 and you're gone.
Right, I understand that, but I mean, we could just create another channel.
Well,
People come to Mr. Dash.
Oh, I got you. You know, like a certain guy named Scott used to do.
Yeah.
Well,
let's talk about this let's talk about this offline. Let's entertain these people instead of talking about offline stuff. Because I got some Kari Lake stuff to drop.
All right, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'll just start with the good news. Kari Lake lost her trial. That's not the good news, or the judge ruled against her. Katie Hobbs, Mark Elias, Perkins Coie wanted the judge to sanction the lawyers for having the tenacity to actually, petition their government for redress of grievances. They said it was the frivolous lawsuit, and if you're on Twitter the last week, they were saying, "Oh, they should all go to jail for bringing a lawsuit," which is absolute horse. You know what? The judge came in today and he said, "Is hereby ordered." Blah blah blah. I'm sorry, I had it up here. The judge chose not to sanction the lawyers. He said they were not frivolous, and this basically they didn't prove the case, is what he's saying, but they had a legitimate case. And that's why he granted the case in the first place. So to ask for sanctions is actually an insult to the judge's judgment for allowing the hearing to go forward. What I didn't like about what the judge did is he set a very high burden of proof. And that's what I wanted to talk about with Doug and Ron today, is basically he was saying that Kari Lake had to prove that it was intentional malfeasance as opposed to misfeasance to disenfranchise voters.
So in other words, he was saying that the lack of procedural following procedures was there, but it wasn't because of trying to do something bad. It just happened.
Yeah. Now, if you watch the trial, which I did, you could actually prove that. Well, one of the Kari Lake's expert witnesses was this guy from Alabama who's some kind of forensic investigator, and he was brilliant testimony. I called him a combination of Forrest Gump and Mr. Spock. And you just don't. The guy's got to be on the spectrum. You just do not mess with these guys. If you're a prosecutor, every time the Hobbs team tried to question him, he just put them in their places. It was very entertaining. But his testimony was it's all about the 19-inch ballot printer issues. If you try to put a 20-inch print on a 19-inch ballot or vice versa, the machine won't be able to read it, and that's
right,
what caused it
because it widens it, or yeah. Mm-hmm.
So his expert testimony is that that could not be done, period, unless someone did it. It's not an accident. It happened in multiple locations. Now, here's where it gets fun. Is the Hobbs expert, Maricopa County employee, testified on day one that he didn't even know about these 19-inch ballot issues. He'd never heard of it.
Right.
Well, then Lake's expert testified that night. Apparently, they changed their story, and the guy testifies the next day. The Maricopa County guy says, not only did we know about it, but it's happened in at the primary and the general election in 2020 and in the primary in 2022. It's happened 3 times before, which brings up a couple questions. 3 questions. Did he perjure himself the previous day? Is the act of covering it up and changing his story, is that not proof of malfeasance? What are you trying to hide? And the Lake's attorneys could have dug a lot deeper on this. They didn't do a great job, but they'll have time to prepare on appeals, and they should be able to hammer this home. Because if the Forrest Spock expert witness, if you see this guy, you'll understand what I'm talking about when I give him that nickname. It's perfect. I cracked myself up on that one. No, he basically says, look, to change the printer settings, you do it throughout the network. And it's not something that can happen on accident. All the testimony made it seem very clear that the printers were working fine the day before when they did their logic and their logic tests. So if they actually did show that it had to be done intentionally, and the judge chose not to hear that evidence, and if you read his decision, apparently he chose not to hear that, That's going to be where they hammer it home. But there's a couple other questions for the Maricopa, I would tell you. If this happened previously, why was it not put into your training manuals across your county? And two, why did it take so long to find this problem on election day if you already knew that this is a problem that existed?
So, but is that proof of malfeasance, or is that just proof of not following through, or lack of doing their job properly?
Well, if someone
See,
had
that I think that's where they're coming from. You can't prove they did it on purpose.
well, you can't.
Maybe they're just idiots.
You can.
That's the argument. I'm not saying that's the truth. I'm saying that's the argument.
Well, this is what the expert witness is going to. The way you do the questioning, and the expert witness would say, is to change the printer settings across the county. And now Maricopa County said it only happened in 3 places. Kerry Lake's team made it very clearly. We inspected ballots at 6 different locations, and they all had the same problem. So you got Maricopa County lying again that it was only a 3. But the way the questioning needs to go is, okay, who had access to your system that could have changed the printer settings in multiple locations? And the way that this works at big corporations, you don't ever do it one at a time. You do it network wide, because otherwise human error comes into the element. It's a script that is printed. If that change happened, then there is a record of it, that the change was happening, and you got to know who did it, and you can prove this. This is a forensically provable case. The other issue comes that they were, the other item that was up on that was came down to what's the word I'm looking for? Disenfranchisement. Can you prove how many people were disenfranchised? And you quantitatively cannot. So the big question that comes down to, my question for Doug that I came to ask today is, and the judge properly attributed current Arizona state law, and he cited the right cases. According to Arizona state law, the burden is very, very high, and you have to assume that the county ran the elections honestly. Is that the right interpretation of how it should be? When you're certifying an election, don't you have to say that you followed all procedures and be able to prove that before you can certify it?
I would say yes, but then from a legal stance, innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and that's what's going to be at stake in the appeals. But we actually can prove the malfeasance at this point. There is going to be a forensic record.
Yeah, but that goes back to why the judge said that intent had to be proven, because even the Secretary of State's office is innocent until proven guilty. That's how our legal system works.
Let me stop you guys there, because we have Pat Brockman asks a question, and this is a little bit more in line with the spirit of the Constitution.
Well, Ron, before we do that, there's one other. Can we just wrap this one up? Because I want to address that question as well. It's a good question. Let me just wrap this up, because a little further, Raging Smirk talked about chain of custody, and that's the other real big issue here.
Okay.
So basically, if you look, Ron, if you go in to vote in person, the chain of custody is very simple: from you to the box, basically. Okay, and then where it gets counted. 2 steps. Maricopa County has got 6 stages. Now, 5 of those 6 stages. Okay, so they've got a very meticulous set of rules, and they train very well on it, and they follow these rules during the election, or all the days preceding the election, and they've got all the documentation and account of how many votes go in, except for on election day, where somehow, for whatever reason, all the ballots go to Runbeck, and Runbeck loses chain of custody. Maricopa County can't produce the election day count of how many ballots went to Runbeck. Runbeck employees have testified, that they were able to insert their own ballots into it, which is breaking chain of custody, but also that they weren't keeping track of it on election day. So this is a major issue. Lake's team did not hammer it home hard enough, but if you can't prove your chain of custody and you can't document it, you don't have chain of custody, and they have it for every other day but election day. So I think that's got to be hammered home. Now take it away, Ron.
All right. So this is from a podcast from 5 years ago. Episode 58, Necessary and Proper. Pat's question is,
I just watched that episode last month.
you said that in the video back in 1788, we didn't have Federalists and Anti-Federalists. When did those titles come, and who called them by those titles?
All right, the term Federalist and Federalism first emerged during the convention. They did call themselves Federalists, and Federalists meant from the mouths of those who were in the convention in 1787 that they supported this new federal system of government. The term Federalist was hijacked by Alexander Hamilton in, I want to say, 1790 or 91, when he created the Federalist Party. The Federalist Party was not federalist. It was not. There was no federalism about it. It was a nationalist party that believed in bigger government. They stole the term federalist or federalism from those who had considered themselves federalists in the sense of believing in the federal system that was created by the Constitution. As for anti-federalist writings sprang up as early as September of 1787, immediately after the Constitution was signed and its language went public. Whether or not they were actually called anti-federalist writings at the time, I am not positive, but I do know once a lot of those essays were collected together a few years later, 1790, 1791, the term anti-federalist papers and anti-federalist was being used. So those terms actually did emerge very quickly. But once again, when you say federalist or federalism, we got to be careful not to get confused because it was used twice. Do you mean those who believe in the federal system or those who were part of the Federalist Party? Go ahead.
Well, it's 1789, and everything else you said is absolutely spot on and matches, because I've just been reading up on this stuff, but I got a quick quote. The party appealed to businesses and to quote-unquote conservatives who favored banks, national overstate government, manufacturing, an army and a navy, standing army, and in world affairs preferred Great Britain and strongly opposed the French Revolution. It was basically the old school deep state. Well, the establishment. Yeah, we were talking about the establishment.
The exact same crap we're battling now.
Yeah, Yankees.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's what they are. They are
Brian,
Puritan Yankees.
Pat says that in the video, Brian called them proponents and opponents.
No, they call themselves Federalists even during the convention.
Well, yeah, that's actually a really good point there, because you're proponents of the Constitution and the opponents of it who thought it was going too far.
Yeah. Those terms are accurate. Whether or not they were using them,
no,
perhaps,
I think
the terms. But they did call themselves Federalists.
No. I think you're misunderstanding. I think Brian was using proponents and opponents. Not he wasn't saying. He didn't say that they were.
From Pat's point of view, Federalist and Anti-Federalist wasn't being used. Proponent and opponent was being used instead. And I'm saying historically, that's not necessarily the case. Federalists and Anti-Federalists were being used. I don't know when Anti-Federalists when that term began to emerge. People who were against the Federalist federal idea, Federalists, emerged immediately after the Constitution went public. But the term Federalists and them calling themselves Federalists was immediate during the convention. They were proponents. They may have sometimes called themselves proponents, but they did call themselves Federalists. It was proponents and opponents instead of Federalists and Anti-Federalists. That's my point.
Kikio's got an interesting question in there, Doug. I know you're going to want to touch that one.
All right, let me scroll down to it. Doug, I have a question. All right. Is it constitutional for the government to say that someone has to be a certain age to own a firearm?
Which government?
I know it sounds dumb, but I'm not. I'm just curious. It is totally unconstitutional for the federal government to say that you have to be a certain age to own a firearm. But if your state wants to pass a law saying, hey, you need to be at least 14 or 18 or 21 or 30, that's up to that state. Now, that said, if the state goes too far and it gets a little ridiculous, then as a people, we need to correct our state.
I knew you were going to love that one. You know, Ron and I had a lot of fun with that New York gun ruling the same week as the Dobbs decision, and we probably ought to do a full video on that one of these days. That's, you know, there's a lot of people who would call themselves constitutionalists. They're going to go to their graves saying all gun laws are, you know, unconstitutional.
Yeah, they bought into the incorporation doctrine. In other words,
yeah, that we really ought to do an
incorporation. Well, I think you shared with me it was a passage from that book that McClanahan of all people did.
The one Doug's reading right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we have time to jump into incorporation, but we really ought to do an entire show on it, or a couple of them.
Yeah, I'm reading this one and this one.
Yep. So interestingly enough, incorporation theory came into play in the Kerry Lake case. That's funny. You're reading On God. I got to show you another book. I'd have to.
Are you familiar with that book?
Yeah. Give me 1 minute.
Sydney gave it to me.
Give me 1 second. I'll show you the 2 books I am right now reading. I'll be right back.
Okay. So while he's going, On God is by Barry Mahler, who is actually a pastor out here. So he autographed the book. My executive assistant or administrative assistant, we're not sure what to call her yet, but she volunteers a lot of time to help me out. Sydney gave me the book, and I guess it's her pastor. But hey, you're familiar with it. But what I got a kick out of is the author of this book, when he signed the book, put, Doug, Mr. Constitution, thanks for fighting the good fight. Defend the image. Barry. So.
Defend the image?
Yes. And what he meant was the subtitle on God is humanity's glorious struggle with hell over the image of God. Defend the image.
So I am currently reading, this one was given to me by the Lady Hamster, But God. It's actually a pretty good read. I'm about halfway through it already. Okay. It's a Christmas present.
I've seen it in somebody's hand. I don't think it was yours, but I'm not real familiar with it.
Yeah, well, Lady Hamster actually knows the author, or knew in college, which is interesting.
Okay, very cool. Very cool.
This one, which I believe Ron has, is about Epstein, the CIA.
I have them both.
Yeah, well, I don't have the second one. I'm not done with
Who's the author?
Whitney Webb. She's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm familiar with her. Okay.
And of course,
all right.
My Christmas present from Doug, of course, which I have not opened yet.
Of course.
Poor Richard's Almanac by Benjamin Franklin.
All right. Now that we're in the share and tell portion of the show, Ron, do you have? No, I'm kidding.
Ron's got a lot of books. Don't tempt him.
No. I decided not to tempt him.
Even though this is a picture,
Dodger hat.
Even though this is a picture of that is real. That's all. Those books are real.
Yeah.
I have a large collection.
You have a cute little collection of books. Yes.
I give the man credit. He does read.
Yeah. I have over 4,000 books, man. I've read more than half of them.
I'm not sure I have that many, but that's yeah. Well,
a lot of my books are resources for my books.
The reason that I actually want the hard copies is because people are there is a clear attempt to eliminate writings like that.
Yes, there are. And that's why I have a lot of older copies of books that you can't even find anymore.
It's interesting. It's like Fahrenheit 451 is like coming into being, like as in real.
Mm-hmm. Fahrenheit 451, by the way.
That's the temperature that paper burns.
Has my favorite opening paragraph of any book ever.
Hey, trivia time, Ron. What temperature does steel melt at?
Steel, I believe, melts at like 1,800 degrees.
That's about right.
Oh, quit grinning! I know what you're trying to pull.
But that's one trivia question I know that man's never going to get wrong.
All right, now let's get back to what we're supposed to be talking about here. Questions and answers, Constitution, all of that jazz. By the way, I've been working on an article which is actually from a book I wrote, but I'm fixing it so that it's presentable on my blog. Should show up on Political Pistachio later tonight. So if you guys don't visit politicalpistachio.com, I've been putting some pretty good articles and videos out since I have the time at the moment because I don't have classes. So check that out. All right. But no, I believe that the question about federalism versus anti-federalism and when the terms are used was actually a very good question, because one of the things that we've known, and this goes back to what Ron said at the very beginning, words, our lexicon has been messed with, and we know it, but we don't know which part of our lexicon is right and wrong and in between. And so the question is, did they call themselves Federalists? What does Federalist really mean? Does it mean what those at the convention meant, or does it mean what the Federalist Party meant, or something else? What does regulate mean? What does, and we can go on and on and on with this list of words or phrases or ideas. That all said, regardless of the lexicon, and this is something I was saying earlier, it's still the same crap. We are fighting the same enemy. The enemy just is put on a different mask. It's got a different logo, using different technology, but it's the same enemy. And it's anti-liberty enemy. It's an enemy that believes that you're not capable of making your own decisions, and therefore a ruling elite must be in place to make the determinations for you, because individualism is some type of psychopathic idiocy or something like that. And so the collective under their control is the only way that humanity can survive. So we're going to have trains that go to nowhere so we can fix the mega plexes, in place so that we can have a new world order after the Great Reset, which ain't going to happen because they missed their window.
Oh, yeah. What's
oh, did I trigger something?
Yeah, something's going on behind the scenes that a lot of people aren't aware of yet. You're seeing Fortune 500 companies, CEOs are getting pressure from their boards of directors. They're basically pressuring BlackRock to back off on this ESG stuff. Mm-hmm. As we talk about these 6,000 oligarchical families and multinational corporations that sit at the table, they're always playing the global Game of Thrones. Well, the chairs are shifting, and there's some people that are saying, looks like Great Reset isn't going to happen, and they're going to make sure that they've got a seat and a power base when the music stops. So
they missed their window.
Yeah, well, the people that are pushing it are other power structures and alliances are backing down. You're seeing this with the ESG big time. You're going to see, I think my prediction for 2023 is it'll be the worst year on the global warming hoax front in quite some time. There's going to be an awful lot of pushback there. And Ron and I talked about this, got on air about a year ago, about how Russia and Ukraine basically stymied the Great Reset, because you can't have one world government when you have a multipolar currency world. You can't go to your global digital currency if over 50% of the global population isn't playing along. It doesn't work.
The global game doesn't work if everybody doesn't agree.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's the Primakov doctrine. I think, Ron, we started talking about that in March. And
we started talking about that right about the time that we had that discussion with Matt Arrett, which was like March, April.
Yeah, it was February, March. It was right when the Russia stuff started up. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there is a shuffling of the chairs on the deck right now in the power structure. Now, does that impact you and I? Yeah, it will at some point. But
I saw a very interesting meme the other day, and it said, so many people are fighting for a seat at the table that Jesus would have flipped.
It almost sounds like a John Wick movie or something. Everybody fighting for a seat at the table.
Well, that is what it is with a little bit less. Well, the violence isn't individualized; it's done on a state level.
Yeah. All right. Joy has a question. Which constitutional rights are being abused currently by our administration? And then there's a list of things that she knows are being abused. All right, let's first of all, getting back to terminology, lexicon, words. Let's first of all make a correction in your question. We don't have constitutional rights. None of your rights are guaranteed or protected or given to you by the Constitution. You have natural rights, which are naturally yours. Some might call them God-given rights. They are given to you through divine dispensation, as the Saxons would say. So I know the constitutional rights, that's a term we like to use. But first of all, it's natural rights. Now, rights that are enumerated in the Constitution that are being violated, pretty much all of them. That said, and I could write a book thicker than Obamacare on this, by the way. But you're right. So we've got freedom of religion, from the shutting down the churches during that period of time when the COVID was thought to be rampant. I wasn't going to use my usual term because, well, it might, create a stab in the ribs for us for this episode. Religious freedom is also being attacked in other ways. We have, how many times have we heard about, well, in Wyoming, I know there was some traveling preachers that were arrested, so on and so forth. So that's your first one of the First Amendment. Your second one, speech. Well, need I say more? Press, same thing. Need I say more? Association, assembly. While for the most part we still have a freedom of assembly and freedom of association, there are some isolated cases in which that is being violated, and in some larger cases. Petition the government for redress of grievances. We ourselves have let go of that one in the sense of petitioning our government with actual petitions. That's something that pretty much started dying out in the early 1800s, about the 1830s, 40s. They actually did, communities would actually have a petition they would send to their local legislature or their state legislature or Congress, and the legislative bodies, before beginning their other work, would go through those petitions first at the beginning of every session. That is no longer in place. But also, there's a certain date on the first month of the year. A year ago, we're coming up on its 1-year anniversary. What were those people doing?
You mean
were they not petitioning their government? I'm sorry?
You mean 2-year anniversary?
2-year. I'm sorry. You're right. 2-year anniversary coming up. Thank you. Were they not petitioning their government for redress of grievances? They had a grievance. They believed something wasn't being followed. They believed something had been done wrong. And they were also, by the way, practicing freedom of religion. Many of them, they were to pray, freedom of speech. They were saying what they believed, freedom of the press, freedom of association, assembly. All of the First Amendment rights that enumerated were violated by the federal government just in that one instance. We know of the long list of violations to the right to keep and bear arms. I mentioned in my classes when the Third Amendment was violated years back in Colorado, in which a man was told by the FBI that they wanted to use his house for surveillance for someone across the street. And he said no. They kicked in the door and arrested him. He then sued the federal government for violating the Third Amendment, which the Third Amendment is about the one, no soldier shall be quartered in your house. That includes any federal official, and the FBI quartered themselves in his house against his permission. He won the case. So that one's being violated. And we can then, I'm gonna pull out my Constitution now so I can actually start going through some of these without trying to remember all of them. Fourth Amendment, let's see.
Oh God, where do we start on that one?
Yeah, search and seizure.
Talk about just say J6.
Lack of warrants.
Just say the Patriot Act, and you basically the entire Fourth Amendment is gone.
Well,
Twitter
fifth,
files,
and then the Fifth and Sixth amendments are wiped out by the second anniversary of that particular date coming up. Also,
yeah.
I mean, so to answer your question, Joy, all of them.
Well, wait a minute. The Seventh Amendment may not be. Although Katie Hobbs tried to violate the Seventh Amendment in suits of common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right by trial by jury shall be preserved. Well, maybe not. The Seventh Amendment might be intact right now.
Did you see?
Now there is a certain group out there that's saying it isn't being followed. They're the ones that claim that we're under admiralty law right now.
Did you
But
see?
admiralty law means no jury.
Did you see what Conservative Cowboy just posted? In a 5-4 vote with Justice Gorsuch joining the 3 liberal judges.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court has decided to leave in place Title 42.
Yep. That's they're going to hear the case, and they weren't going to let a circuit local judge overturn a federal mandate. You know, the reason this is the funny part about this is the Biden administration did this to themselves because they just extended the quote unquote COVID emergency to the end of 2023.
Right.
So that gave the justices all the legal backing they needed to do this.
Yeah.
It's terrible that we have to rely on a quote unquote COVID emergency measure to keep our constitution.
Yeah. Well, they want to have it both ways. They want to keep their COVID emergency, but they want to get rid of the provisions that are in place for it. Oh, yeah, but you're exactly right.
Darren, I just read that you texted me. I didn't get a text to me. I didn't know you had my phone number, but how are you going to get that to me? Because I do want to read what you just sent.
He might have meant texted in the chat room.
Oh, okay. I'll scroll up. Let me look for it. There's another fun one. Congress decided to give us a Christmas gift that's going to cost us $1.7 trillion. You know what's interesting about that? Is 220 something Congress critters voted by proxy. Did they have quorum? They're saying they had quorum, which means you have to have 51% with 218 people there, but they did not. And Chip Roy called this out, point of procedure. There's a chance that that someone is going to be able to sue to block that bill, the spending bill.
Interesting. They didn't have quorum, is what Chip Roy said. You know, Chip Roy is fast becoming one of my
yeah, he's been good.
My top racers in the race.
This is that was the what?
That's the omnibus spending bill, which has got all kinds of ungodly. I mean, we could do 5-hour show every day for a week going through that thing. I mean, it is the worst. It is, I'm going to say, bar none, the worst spending bill in the history of the United States, and it's not even close.
Not even a contest compared to the others.
House
And the others are pretty bad.
1.7 bill. It passed on a 225 to 201 vote.
Tracy says, "How do you eat olives without a martini wrapped around it?" But to answer that, I also cannot drink Coca-Cola without bourbon mixed with it. So,
So if it was past 225 to 201, that would mean to me that there was quorum.
Well, no, there was not. According to Chip Roy, there was not quorum. But it's.
Well, the thing is, were some of those votes were the people actually there when some of those numbers were tabulated? Because I can't count. For example, there is a person who used to be in the state assembly, then was a state senator for a while, Melissa Melendez here in Southern California, a friend of mine. And she said that often what would happen in the votes there in Sacramento is the member would not be able to be there, or they were taking a nap. And so they would send their intern to vote for them, which is illegal. And she can't count how many times she saw that. Not that I'm saying this is the case there, but that's possible. So it is possible for it to look like, based on the number of votes, that there was a quorum and there not actually be a quorum.
No, you can't. No,
that's my point.
It's cut and dried of how many people voted by proxy, because this is the rule put in place by Nancy Pelosi for quote unquote COVID that allowed people to actually.
Oh, they are allowing vote without being
proxy
present?
Voting. Here, let me share this.
It's a COVID emergency measure.
I was not aware of that.
But Mr. Roy,
you need to be there. You need to be there. That's BS.
Proxy voting goes out with a bang in the House. Proxy voting went out with a bang in the House on Friday, with a majority of lawmakers in the chamber voting remotely during what will likely be the last time members can utilize the pandemic era procedure. The House convened Friday morning, but fewer than 50% of lawmakers showed up on the floor to weigh in. A total of 226, 52.4% of the body, when accounting for vacancies, voted remotely. Interesting.
Yeah, you want to have some fun with that one? Fun little rabbit hole.
Yeah.
The other interesting point is what the vote was on the Senate floor. So a bill like this needed 60 senators, which means you needed a lot of Republicans to cross the aisle. And well, we got 18 of them. 18 Republicans voted with the Dems. And I just like to put to rest the idea that Tom Cotton is a good guy. For the umpteenth time, he'll come out there and give you 30-second sound bites and challenging the leftist agenda, and everyone goes, "Oh, we love Tom Cotton," but no, he crossed the line again.
He's a good guy on occasion.
Yeah, which is about as useless as what on a bull.
Yeah.
If you can't rely on them, that's what I would say. If your principles aren't consistent, you don't have principles.
I used to feel like you could kind of rely on him, but not of late.
No, he's also a World Economic Forum young global leader. If that, if you don't need any more icing on the cake. But the other 17, I would have expected. A lot of people were surprised by Tom Cotton. I mean, the guy's he's shown you his spots, so I'm kind of done with him. I remember 2-3 years ago, people were talking about him as a future presidential candidate, and I'm just, MAGA Tom Cotton, really? Look at his voting record.
Yeah, well, and then one other thing also, and most people don't know this, he's also a member of the CFR.
Oh, he is.
Mm-hmm. And matter of fact, in 2017, he gave a speech to a CFR-sponsored event.
Well, Conservative Cowboy just talked about Judge Thompson not sanctioning Kari Lake's attorneys. Well, yeah, I opened with that, and the see if I can find this again. You basically said, no, but their case had merit. They just didn't prove it, which ought to shut up all of left-wing Twitter calling it a frivolous suit. So we did talk about that, but they may have to pay a little bit in terms of expert witness fees. But at the end of the day, Judge Thompson said, no, this is a legitimate case.
Yeah.
So they didn't prove it to my satisfaction, but that's kind of good news when it comes to appeals. And that appeals has got to be rushed. Sadly, the way our system works, thanks to the help of the media, is Katie Hobbs will be sworn in before this appeals court. And that kind of makes, for whatever reason, makes the burden harder. They say, oh, we can't overturn. She's already been sworn in. It's a done deal. Well, no, that's not justice. That's political expediency. So Kari Lake's going to keep fighting. And
I don't see her giving up, and I see her remaining on the scene just like President Trump has. Yeah, that's one thing about California is we'll get a quote unquote champion that'll emerge for one election cycle and then vanish. Nobody sticks around long enough to keep up the fight here.
Yeah, we really ought to talk at some point about campaign finance, because that's a huge part of the problem.
That got brought up, matter of fact, in a meeting I was in the other day, and I brought up the almighty war hamster and the Brady Amendment. You gotten me to the point where I'm bringing that up often now.
Well, I got some more ideas. We'll talk offline, but it makes sense. It makes sense. It's funny is it's Citizens United is the case that we're basically taking on,
which Republicans are all for. Hey, what a wonderful thing.
Oh well, no. If you spend time on Democrat websites, which I do, because I like to know what they're thinking, they think all the dark money comes from the Republican Party is all about the dark money super PACs, and they're unaware
because the Republicans are all about the rich, don't you know? Therefore, it must be rich people giving them money, even though it's really the exact opposite.
It's not the exact. No, they are correct that the Republican Party is 100% owned by their super PAC dark money, And the Democrat, but what they're not willing to do is look in the mirror and realize that their party is the same.
Right.
The problem isn't Republican against Democrat. The problem is that the big money runs both parties, and that's why we need that amendment. But Citizens United, I believe, and Doug, I haven't brought this one up to you before, and I'd love to hear Ron weigh in on it. I think Citizens United can be challenged on the basis that it holds that corporations are people, and I will challenge that finding, because if they were people, they would be allowed to vote. And,
Right.
and by the exact wording in Citizens United's opinion, they basically state that First Amendment rights of people, since corporations aren't people, are expressed by campaign contributions. Well, okay, then you're disenfranchising these corporations by not giving them the right to vote. You can't have it both ways. Either they are people 100% and have a right to vote and give money, or they're not people and don't have the right to vote or give money. They're trying to have it both ways, and that's the challenge right there. You're either a corporation is a person or it is not. And if it is a person, you have to give them the right to vote. And if you do that, you're disenfranchising people who don't own a corporation. So it's self-evident. I think this is a winnable argument. The question is, how do we establish standing? Who has standing to challenge it?
Well, and it also depends on what judge you get, and if the judge agrees with you, because really that's what it boils down to.
Well, if you're going to challenge Citizens United, I don't care which judge we get, because it's going to Supreme Court. That's the whole idea. So if we want to challenge it, you got to have an organization who's got the ability to take it all the way, and has standing. But I think there's an argument to be made. What say you, Doug?
I agree.
This is going to touch third rail, kind of, maybe, sort of. Are you guys familiar with Jesse Saboter?
Wait, the name.
I may be familiar with the situation they're associated with.
Jesse Saboter. Jesse Saboter is a woman who came out and gave testimony. She was a victim of SRA. A survivor of SRA, and names a litany of people that she witnessed, like firsthand, that participated in some of these rituals, but also named quite a few people that are that were victims when at the time that she was there. And thank you, Tracy. Yes, that's right. I just didn't want to say that because of the platform that we're on. Three people that she talks about that were victims of this at her time in this, like, church in Rockfield, Illinois, or whatever. She mentions three people, and Madonna was one of them. Elon Musk and Amy Coney Barrett. I thought that was very interesting.
Send me a link when you get a chance. I want to read up on that.
Okay, I will do that.
There
are people who question the validity of her statements, and you know, hey, listen, I don't know what's true, but it's just interesting that she has stated some of these things. I became aware of this about a week ago.
So we're past 4 o'clock. Do you guys want to go over by a bit today? I got no place to be.
I actually got to run to the post office. I got to be there by 4:30, which is just up the street. But still, I mean, if you guys want to continue on,
I will need to get off the air as well, because even though I have no place to be, my wife wants to be wherever that is with me.
Doug, I would like to talk to you off air when in a few minutes, if you have a moment.
Okay, so I have a moment. And now it is my understanding that next year, the first Tuesday, we then begin with the Constitution at the beginning again. Is that the plan?
Yes. And actually, you know what? So why don't we go ahead and let's just go ahead and end the end the video now, and then you guys stick around, and then we'll talk here in a minute off the air. So we're going to go ahead and say goodbye, everybody. But next week we're going to start with the Constitution. Where are you going to start with?
Do you start with a little bit of history and then the preamble?
Okay. Perfect. So that's what we're going to start with next week, and we will look forward to seeing y'all here next week at the 3 p.m.
And as for Conservative Cowboys question, quorum is a majority, not 2/3.
You need 50% plus 1 to be considered a quorum, and it can't be 50. That's why it's an odd number. It's an important distinction.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, enjoy your new year, and we will start 2023 off with a bang with the with a little bit of history and the preamble as we begin our trek through the Constitution once more. So thanks everybody for making 2022 a memorable year, and we look forward to 2023.
Yeah, we're gonna have some new stuff going through the Constitution that we didn't do the last time, just because the situation in the real world keeps changing.
Yeah.
So if you've been through it once, that's not a reason not to do it again. We're going to keep it current.
And also, you want to hear it again. You want to go through it again. You want to take notes again because, this funny thing about this brain we have, we only remember so much. But when you go through it again and you do it with friends,
it's kind of like when you watch a movie once and then you watch it again and then you watch it again and then you watch it again.
And you know the ending, but now you're like, that now makes sense.
Every time you see it again, you pick up on something that you missed the previous few times. So
that's why he said that.
It's even more than that, because in a movie it's the same content every single time, but in this show, Ron and I are basically, we're reading books, watching videos, learning, and we're going to come to Doug with questions that he hasn't heard before. So the show is going to continue to get better.
Point.
Yeah, I mean, look, what is it? I think I'm on like my 7th or 8th time through the Constitution with Doug, and it hasn't gotten boring yet. I'll let him know when it does.
Yeah. All right, guys. So, we will look forward to seeing you next week, bright and early, I guess, or chipper, or with bells on, whatever you want to say. So, but I look forward to seeing you guys again next week. So, Happy New Year.
Cheers, everyone. Doug, take us home.
United we stand.